They never told you what she buried beneath the floorboards. They never told you what crawled out of those children's cribs at night, or why every doctor who tried to expose her died, whispering the same word, unnatural. But if you're still here, then you're ready to hear it. Ready to walk into the part of American history they sealed away with lime, mud, and fear. In the winter of 1872, when Tennessee's mountains were nothing but black silhouettes against a dying sky, a slave midwife named Miriam Holt carried a secret heavier than any child she ever delivered. She was born in chains, but it wasn't the chains that made her dangerous. It was the bloodline she served. The Holt plantation wasn't known for cotton. It was known for children who were born wrong. Limbs bent in impossible angles, eyes that opened too soon, skin that felt too cold for the living. Some came out breathing, some came out silent, but all of them shared one thing. None of them were entirely human. The plantation wives whispered that Miriam worked with roots and herbs found nowhere in Tennessee. The men said she carried jars filled with things that moved when no wind touched them. And the slaves, the ones who saw everything but spoke nothing, said Miriam didn't just deliver children. She delivered justice. Quietly, secretly, one grave at a time. But this story isn't about monsters born in the dark. It's about the people who created them. The men whose names were carved on courthouse doors. The women whose Sunday smiles hid sins older than the Civil War. These weren't accidents. These weren't curses. These were experiments, small, horrific attempts to bend the human body into something that could endure suffering without breaking. And Miriam? She was the only witness. The only one who knew what the Holt family had become. The only one who knew the truth behind their blood. She tried to stop them the only way a woman with no freedom could, by burying their creations before anyone else could see, before those twisted limbs and blackened eyes could reveal what the Holts were doing in their locked rooms at night. But secrets never stay buried. Not in Tennessee's soil, not in America, and not in the mind of the one man who survived one of Miriam's buried children, a man who would grow up to tell the truth they tried to erase. And he's the reason you're hearing this now. They say every secret has a sound. Some whisper, some scratch. But the Holt secret, it breathed. Slow, heavy like something learning how to use lungs that didn't belong to it. And on a storm-thick night in March, that sound crawled into the ears of a man who should have died long before he ever learned to speak. His name was Isaiah. No last name, no record. Just Isaiah, because slaves weren't allowed anything more. He was born on that plantation, under Miriam's shaking hands, while thunder split the sky like a judgment. They expected him to die in minutes, like most of the Holt children. His skin was ashen, his bones too soft, and his eyes. God help anyone who looked into those eyes. They were wide, too wide. Seeing too much, like they weren't newborn eyes at all, but old ones, borrowed from something ancient. Miriam should have buried him. She knew it. The Holt men wanted her to. They gave her the linen. They dug the hole. They told her no child born wrong should ever take a breath on their land. But when she held Isaiah for the first time in years, one of those wrong children clung to life. His fingers tightened around hers. His breathing steadied. And for a moment, just a moment, Miriam wondered if this one had a purpose. Not theirs. Hers. She hid him where no one looked, inside the old wash house behind the cane field. She nursed him with roots and teas she never taught another soul to make. She taught him to walk long before the Holts knew he still existed. But even hidden, Isaiah felt the weight of something watching him. Always, especially at night, when a wind slid through the cracked boards and he heard whispering, too soft to be human, too deliberate to be wind. The Holts sensed it too. Their house shook at odd hours. Livestock refused to go near the well. The children woke screaming about a shadow child walking the hall. But Miriam kept Isaiah alive for one reason. She believed he wasn't one of their creations. She thought he was the warning, because Isaiah didn't look like the other whole horrors. He looked almost normal, except for those eyes, those knowing, ancient eyes that seemed to say, "I remember what they did before I was born." Miriam feared the Holts would find him, but she feared something else even more, that whatever they summoned into that bloodline was using Isaiah to finish what they started. By the time Isaiah turned 6, he could sense things before they happened. Not visions, not dreams. Something sharper, like the air itself, warned him. If a branch was about to snap, he flinched before it broke. If a stranger was about to lie, he felt heat rise under his skin. And when the Holt men walked near the wash house, he hid in the shadows seconds before their boots even touched the threshold. Miriam watched all of this in silence. She didn't celebrate it. She didn't fear it either. She recognized it, because she'd seen the same awareness, the same unnatural instinct in the other Holt children before she'd buried them. But Isaiah was different. He didn't rot. He didn't twist. He didn't become a creature shaped by pain. He became aware. And awareness is the one thing slave owners feared more than rebellion. One night, when the cicadas screamed loud enough to mask footsteps, Miriam took Isaiah deep into the forest, past the creek, past the hollow stump, past the line no slave was supposed to cross. Isaiah thought she was finally letting him see the world. But Miriam's hands shook the way they only did when she was about to tell a truth that could get them both killed. She knelt in the dirt and said, "Child, you weren't supposed to live, not because of what you are, but because of what they became." Isaiah didn't understand, but the forest did. The wind dropped dead still. The trees seemed to lean in. Miriam dug her fingers into the soil as if the earth itself was listening. "The Holt men," she whispered, "been mixing bloodlines they should have left alone. Slave, master, stranger, creature, don't matter. They want to make something that can survive a world built on pain and keep building it forever." Isaiah felt his throat go dry. "They think suffering makes something stronger," she said. "They think breaking a body makes a better one. But what they made, what came through those women, wasn't built for this world." Isaiah asked the only question a child could. "What am I?" Miriam touched his face. Her fingers trembled like she was touching a loaded gun. "You're the one they didn't get to finish," she said. "And that's why they want you back." Branches cracked behind them. Heavy, slow, too heavy for a man, too slow for an animal. Something had been following them. Not a slave, not a Holt. Miriam yanked him back, so hard he fell. "Don't look at it," she hissed. "It ain't alive the way you think. It listens. It imitates. It learns." The creature tilted its head. Its joints cracked like wet branches snapping. Then it opened its mouth, and a sound came out that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a laugh. Something in between. Something that suggested it remembered Miriam's hands, her voice, her knife. It remembered the night she tried to give it mercy. And it wasn't angry. It was curious. Then it stepped forward, and the moonlight hit its face. Isaiah didn't scream. He whispered one word. "Me." Miriam didn't breathe when she heard Isaiah whisper that word. "Me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, raw and instinctive, like two flames remembering they were once the same fire. Isaiah's voice trembled, but not from terror. From connection. as if something inside him had finally opened its eyes. The creature stepped closer. Its ribs shifted under its skin like trapped fingers. Its spine curled forward, then straightened too fast, as if learning how to stand in real time. No child Miriam ever delivered had moved like that. Not even the ones she buried in the cold ground before their first heartbeat faded. This one moved with intention. It studied Isaiah the way a starving man studies his own reflection in water. Confused, wanting, desperate to understand. Isaiah leaned forward again. He didn't fight it. He didn't even blink. But Miriam finally snapped. She grabbed Isaiah's face with both hands and forced him to look at her, nodded. "Listen to me," she whispered, voice shaking. "That thing is the piece they carved out of you. It ain't you. It ain't human. And it ain't finished." Isaiah's eyes darted between her and the creature. "Then why does it know me?" "Because the Holts wanted to split a soul and see if both sides could live." Isaiah felt the meaning even if he didn't understand the words. His chest tightened. His mouth went dry. The creature mirrored his breathing, shallow, fast, trembling. Every inhale he took, it took. Every fear he felt, it echoed like a shadow repeating a gesture a half second too late. Miriam pushed Isaiah behind her and stepped forward, blocking the creature's view. For a moment, the forest trembled, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. "Miriam," the creature gurgled. It spoke, not in words, in imitation. It repeated the shape of her name, dragging it across a throat never meant for speech. The sound broke something inside her. For years she'd lived with guilt for what she'd buried. But hearing it try to speak her name, that was worse than any scream she'd silenced. She whispered, "You should have stayed in the ground." The creature tilted its head again. Then it pointed slowly with a shaking, half-formed hand directly at Isaiah. A soft, wet whisper slipped through its teeth. "Come." Isaiah's knees buckled, not from fear, from the truth swelling inside him. That whatever this thing wasn't hunting him. It was calling him home. Miriam felt Isaiah sway beside her, as if the creature's voice pulled threads inside his chest she couldn't see. She grabbed his arm, but the moment she did, she felt something under his skin, something humming, vibrating, answering the call. Isaiah winced, not from pain, from resonance. Like two tuning forks struck at the same time, vibrating toward each other. The creature reached out again, not aggressively, not violently, but with familiarity, like it already knew the shape of Isaiah's hand. Miriam stepped between them, shaking, breath coming in sharp bursts. "You ain't taking him," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Not again. Not ever." The creature's head twitched, confused by the word again. It looked at Miriam as if she were an unfinished memory. Something half remembered from the night she buried it. Something soft and warm and full of sorrow. Isaiah whispered, "Why does it want me?" Miriam didn't answer at first. She didn't want to say it. But truths buried too long rot in the dark. And this one was already peeling itself open. "Because you're the part they kept," she said. "And that thing, that's the part they threw away." Isaiah shook his head. "A part of me can't walk on its own." "It ain't yours anymore," Miriam said. "They made sure of that. They carved up bloodlines and bodies until nothing lived the way it should. That creature ain't your shadow, child. It's your replacement." Isaiah felt something twist inside him. Rage, confusion, and an awful longing. The creature felt it too. It lurched forward, ribs rippling as water disturbed. Miriam shoved Isaiah behind her again. But the creature didn't attack. It knelt. Its joints cracked like breaking seashells as it sank to the forest floor, bowing its head, opening its arms wide, as if presenting itself to Isaiah, as if returning to the one whose existence made its own incomplete. Isaiah whispered, "Maybe it just wants peace." Miriam snapped, "No, it wants unity. What they split in the night you were born. Something in both of you knows it ain't whole." A cold wind cut through the trees. Isaiah took one step toward the creature. Leaves trembled, shadows shifted, and Miriam felt it, the same way she felt when a stillborn child's heartbeat fluttered once before silence. Fats was choosing. She grabbed Isaiah again, but this time his skin was hot, pulsing with something ancient and raw. Isaiah whispered, voice distant, hollow, "It's not calling me." He pointed to the trees behind them. "It's calling them." Branches snapped. Footsteps multiplied. Shapes moved in the dark. Not one creature. Not two. Dozens, all returning to the sound of a soul divided. The forest didn't breathe. It watched. Every tree, every shadow, every inch of darkness shifted as the shapes emerged. Limbs too long, movements too delayed, eyes glowing faint and hollow like lanterns lit with dying fire. Isaiah's breath shook, not from fear, but from recognition. Because each creature, each twisted remnant crawling out of the trees, carried a piece of him. A jawline, a shoulder slope, a matching birthmark, an echo of something stolen the night he came screaming into the world. Miriam staggered backwards as they formed a half circle around her. Some stood upright, some crawled, some dragged themselves like broken things still unwilling to die. But all of them stared at Isaiah with the same fascination, as if he were the missing line in a story they'd been forced to rewrite with their bodies. Isaiah whispered, "What were they?" Miriam swallowed hard. "They're the ones who didn't make it, but they're alive." "No," she said, "they're returning." The largest creature, spine twisted like rope, one arm longer than the other, stepped forward. It didn't snarl. It didn't roar. It simply lifted its ruined hand and pressed it to its own chest, tapping slowly, rhythmically. A heartbeat. Weak, unsteady, borrowed. Then it pointed at Isaiah's chest. "Beat," it rasped. Isaiah froze. One by one, the other creatures mimicked it, tapping their misshapen chests, then pointing at him, over and over. "Beat, beat, beat." Miriam whispered, "They're telling you something." But she already knew. Isaiah's hand lifted on its own. He pressed it against his chest. His heart thumped hard, too hard, like it was responding not just to his body, but to theirs. A collective pulse. A shared rhythm is being dragged across the divide between what should have lived and what should have stayed buried. Then the largest creature stepped close enough for Isaiah to see its face fully. The jaw dislocated with a wet, snapping sound. The spine straightened. The eyes widened, mimicking him, matching him, becoming him. And in a voice that shook like rotting with splitting under weight, it spoke a single word. "Brother." Isaiah's knees buckled. Miriam grabbed him, holding him steady, whispering fiercely, "Don't you believe that? They ain't your brothers. They're experiments. Cries in the dark that never got to be human." But Isaiah looked at them and saw truth. Not monsters, not curses, not failures. Possibilities. The creatures all bowed their heads at once, as if awaiting command. And Isaiah, for the first time, felt what command tasted like. Isaiah felt them kneel, not with their bodies, but with their will. It pressed against him like heat, like gravity, like a crown he hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. The creatures lowered their heads, waiting, listening, breathing in sync with him. And in that moment, Isaiah understood something Miriam had tried to bury along with their bones. He wasn't their victim. He wasn't their mistake. He was their center. Miriam pulled him close, whispering through clenched teeth, "Isaiah, don't you let that feeling in. Power that comes from pain doesn't belong to you." But Isaiah didn't hear her. He was drowning in something deeper. Memories that weren't his, images bleeding into his mind like smoke. Metal tables, lantern light, Holt men with notebooks, whispering excitedly over screaming mothers, holding strange tools shaped like hooks and bone saws. And behind them, a door bar with iron. Something inside is pounding to get out. Isaiah clutched his head as the memories flooded him. Miriam placed both hands on his cheeks. "Listen to me. They're showing you what they felt, what they lived. But that ain't your path." Isaiah looked up slowly, but something in his eyes had changed. Something ancient had awakened. "They're not showing me," he said softly. "They're reminding me." The largest creature crawled forward and placed its head against Isaiah's knees, like a dog greeting a lost master. Its breath rattled, its skin twitched, its malformed ribs expanded and collapsed with effort. Miriam felt sick. "Isaiah, step away." Now, he didn't move, because in that creature's trembling weight, Isaiah felt something impossible. Trust. Raw, broken, but real. Something these beings had never known from the hands that made them. Miriam backed away, shaking her head. She had seen men fall under dark influence before, seen voices take hold of them, seen madness bloom in their eyes. But this wasn't madness. It was awakening. Isaiah whispered, "They're waiting for me to finish what the Holt started." Miriam snapped, "And what's that, child?" Isaiah looked at the circle of creatures around him, each one a chapter in a forbidden story. To bring them back together, the creatures shifted, body straightening, breath synchronizing. "Miriam shouted, 'No, they'll destroy you.'" Isaiah turned to her, voice steady, too steady for a child his age. "They're not here to destroy me." He looked back at the creatures, eyes glowing with a cold, rising certainty. "They're here to follow me." The forest trembled. The creatures bowed. And Isaiah took his first step toward becoming something the Holts never intended. A leader of everything they tried to bury. The moment Isaiah stepped forward, the creatures moved with him, slow, cautious, reverent. Their bodies, twisted by generations of brutality and experiment, tried to mirror his posture. Some failed, some collapsed, some dragged themselves upright again, as if the very act of following him stitched new purpose into their flesh. Miriam backed away until her spine hit a tree. Her breath shook. Her hands trembled. "Isaiah, stop. Look at me, not them." He didn't turn, because for the first time in his life, someone, or rather, something, wasn't afraid of him, wasn't disgusted by him, wasn't hiding him like a shameful secret. They bowed to him, a boy who had never been allowed a last name. The forest air thickened, heavy like the moments before a storm breaks the sky. The creatures inhaled together, exhaled together. Isaiah felt their breath as if it were his own. That shared pulse, that unnatural unity grew stronger, threads tightening between them. Miriam stepped forward, voice breaking. "Child, don't let them turn you into what the Holts wanted." Isaiah whispered, "I was born what the Holts wanted." "No," she said, grabbing his shoulders with shaking hands. "You were born what they couldn't control." Isaiah blinked, slow, thoughtful. Behind him, The largest creature rose to full height, towering above both of them. Its shadow swallowed Isaiah completely. Miriam's breath hitched. She grabbed a stone from the ground, hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "Stay back," she warned the creature. It didn't even look at her. It looked at Isaiah, waiting for instruction. Isaiah turned to face Miriam fully, and for a moment, just a moment, he was the child she'd raised in secrecy. Scared, conflicted, searching. But then the forest whispered again. The pulse rose. The creatures leaned in, and the softness in him died. "Miriam," he said gently, "I know what they want." "What?" she whispered. He pointed toward the deeper woods, the direction of the plantation house, the direction of the Holt bloodline. "They want to go home." Miriam stumbled back as the meaning struck her like a blow. Not to kill, not to reclaim, to return, to the place where they were made, where they were broken, where the line split and screamed. Isaiah stepped forward, and the creatures surged behind him in silent formation. Miriam cried out, "Isaiah, if you walk them back there, nothing on this earth will ever be the same." He didn't look back. "They made us in the dark," Isaiah whispered. "Now we return in the open." The forest parted, and the march began. The path to the whole plantation was soaked in old blood and buried secrets. Every step Isaiah took echoed louder than the last. The creatures following behind like a tide of forgotten nightmares were claiming what was theirs. The moon hung low, casting fractured shadows that twisted and danced with the unnatural procession. Miriam followed at a distance, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and helplessness. She knew what awaited at the old house. Rooms locked tight against the world, hidden basements filled with tools no doctor should own, and secrets that could poison a man's soul forever. But Isaiah walked without hesitation, as if the ground itself whispered encouragement beneath his feet. The creatures around him moved slower now, their twisted limbs scraping against leaves and branches, some pausing to listen to the faint creaks and sighs coming from the plantation. The land remembered everything. Every scream, every cruel experiment, every prayer Miriam had whispered to try to save the children born broken. When they reached the rusted iron gates, Isaiah stopped. The creatures gathered close, waiting. He pressed his palm to the cold metal, feeling vibrations under his skin. Memories, the agony and hope trapped within the walls. The laughter of children who never grew. The whispered names of mothers who lost more than they ever had. Miriam's voice broke the silence. "Isaiah, this isn't your destiny. You don't have to finish what they started." Isaiah turned slowly, eyes glowing faintly. "But I do, because if I don't, someone else will." The gate creaked open on its own, as if the land was yielding to him. The air inside smelled of decay and forgotten prayers. They moved inside, the creatures, the boy, the midwife who tried to stop it all. Downstairs, beneath the plantation, the old operating rooms waited. Tools stained with rust and worse. Chairs that held screams frozen in time. And in the darkest corner, a single book lay on a table, bound in cracked leather, pages yellowed and brittle. Isaiah stepped forward and opened it. It was the Holt family ledger. Every name, every birth, every death, every experiment was recorded with cold precision. And at the bottom, a single line scrawled in shaky ink. "The final child will complete the circle." Miriam swallowed hard. Isaiah whispered, "They meant me." Write the phrase, "I am the circle," in the comments twice now. Say it out loud if you must. Because this isn't just a story anymore. It's a transformation. If you wrote those words, "I am the circle," then you've stepped beyond the veil. You're no longer a passive witness. You're part of the story now, part of a secret too dangerous to speak aloud, yet impossible to ignore. Isaiah closed the ledger with deliberate care. He felt the weight of those words, the promise, the curse, the power. The Holts weren't just playing with bodies. They were playing with souls, breaking them apart, spreading pieces across generations. And Isaiah was the key to putting them back together. But why? Why would a broken lineage want to be whole again? Because what they created was never meant to stay fractured. That shattered bloodline, made of stolen lives and twisted experiments, held the potential to become something beyond human. Something ancient, raw, and terrifying. Something that could bend the very laws of suffering and survival. Miriam looked at Isaiah, her eyes burning with a desperate hope. "You can stop this. You can refuse." Isaiah's gaze hardened. "I can't refuse. They're not just in my blood. They're in my mind. My body remembers what the Holts erased." The creatures stirred behind him, their forms shifting, morphing, becoming more whole with every heartbeat. Isaiah felt their strength growing, fueled by the centuries of pain they carried, the pain he inherited. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about evolution, about reclaiming what was stolen. Miriam's voice trembled. Evolution built on pain is a cage, not freedom. Isaiah nodded slowly, acknowledging her words but not agreeing. "There's a force deeper than pain," he said, something they didn't understand. "It's in the bloodline. It's what made me different. What made them different?" He looked at the creatures behind him. "Together, we're more than broken pieces. We're the future, and the past will have to kneel." Miriam swallowed, knowing the truth she couldn't say aloud. That this boy, this unnatural child, was no longer hers to protect. He was becoming a force she couldn't control, and that force was hungry. Isaiah's words hung heavy in the stale air of the basement, the weight of his destiny settling like dust on old bones. The creatures behind him, once broken shadows, now stood taller, more solid. Their malformed limbs straightened as if the act of belonging to him mended something deep inside their very flesh. This wasn't just unity. It was a transformation. Miriam watched, heart pounding like a war drum, as Isaiah turned back to the ledger. His fingers traced the inked names, each one a story of hope, horror, and betrayal. The whole family had been obsessed with creation, but their vision was twisted by cruelty and dark ambition. They wanted not just to survive, but to transcend. "And what happens," Miriam asked, voice barely above a whisper, "when the broken become whole? When suffering is no longer the limit?" Isaiah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the ledger, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "They become gods. Not the gods the churches preach, but gods of blood and bone. Gods who remember every scar, every scream. Gods who never forget." Miriam swallowed hard, a cold realization creeping into her bones. "You're saying the Holts made monsters to worship pain?" Isaiah's eyes flickered. "No, they made vessels to channel it, to harness the raw power hidden in agony, fear, and endurance. And that power, it's in me now, in us." The creatures behind him hummed softly, a low vibration filling the space. Their collective heartbeat matched Isaiah's, a pulse that grew stronger by the second. Miriam stepped forward, desperation creeping into her voice. "Isaiah, you can fight this. You can choose your own path." He smiled, a grim, haunting curve. The path chose me the moment I was born. But I'm not the puppet. I'm the one pulling the strings now. The basement seemed to darken, shadows lengthening as if the house itself bent toward his will. The ancient evil simmering beneath the plantation had found its vessel, one forged by bloodline and broken promises. Isaiah whispered, voice low but unstoppable. It's time the world remembered the Holt legacy, not as victims, but as rulers. Miriam's eyes burned with silent fury and fear. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for the soul of something far older and darker than she had ever imagined. The night pressed down around them like a suffocating shroud, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten promises. Isaiah stood in the heart of the plantation. The creatures gathered around like a twisted court of broken kings and queens. His eyes glowed faintly, like coals burning beneath ash, as the weight of the Holt legacy settled over him like a crown of thorns. Miriam stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. You say you're no longer a victim, but what will you become if you embrace the darkness in your blood? What monsters will you unleash? Isaiah's gaze flicked to the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Monsters? No, I will unleash what's been buried. The truth, the power, the unbroken circle. Behind him, the creatures shifted, their forms growing more solid, more alive with every passing moment. They weren't just remnants of failed experiments. They were the foundation of a new order, forged in pain and forged in secrecy. Miriam's heart ached for the boy she'd hidden, protected, and fought to save. But the boy standing before her was gone, replaced by something ancient, something fierce, something terrifying. The Holts wanted immortality, Isaiah said, voice low and commanding. Not through gold or glory, but through blood. Through a lineage that could endure any pain, any betrayal, any war. He paused, eyes scanning the faces of his silent followers. And now that lineage is complete. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying whispers of the past, of mothers lost, of children broken, of secrets buried beneath the soil. Isaiah breathed it in, feeling the pulse of history beat through his veins. Miriam took a step forward, voice breaking. You're still a child. You can still choose. Isaiah's smile was a blade. Choice is an illusion. I am the product of their will and the master of their fate. The creatures bowed their heads in unison, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The plantation seemed to pulse with life, shadows dancing as if waking from a long slumber. And in that moment, the darkness was no longer a secret. It was a reckoning. The dawn that should have broken over the Tennessee hills was swallowed whole by a suffocating darkness that refused to lift. Isaiah and his creatures moved through the plantation like ghosts reborn, silent, relentless, and ancient. Every step shook the ground beneath them. Every breath carried the weight of 1,000 buried souls. Miriam watched from the shadows, her heart a storm of fear and defiance. She had tried to hold the darkness at bay, to bury it deep beneath the soil, but the darkness was hungry. And now it had a face. It had a voice. It had a leader. Isaiah's voice cut through the silence, cold and sure. We are no longer victims of the past. We are its architects. We carry the pain and the power, and we will remake this world in our image. Miriam's breath caught. And what about the rest of us? The living? The free? Isaiah's eyes glinted. They are the forgotten, the broken, the weak. The Holts created us to survive everything, to endure what no one else could. And soon, they will learn what that means. The creatures around him stirred, their forms becoming sharper, more defined, as if the power coursing through Isaiah was breathing life back into their fractured bodies. Miriam stepped forward, voice shaking but fierce. "You're a child playing with forces you don't understand. This legacy is a curse, not a gift." Isaiah's smile was merciless. "The greatest power is born from the deepest curse." He turned away, leading his followers toward the heart of the plantation house, a place where shadows writhed and history screamed in silence. Miriam felt the walls close in, the air thick with the weight of secrets ready to be unleashed. And as the first light of dawn struggled to pierce the darkness, Isaiah whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." The plantation held its breath, and the world would never be the same. They say history is written by the victors, but what if the true story lies beneath the dust, beneath the silence, beneath the screams no one was meant to hear? Isaiah and the Holt legacy were about to rewrite the rules of what it means to be human, what it means to endure, to conquer, to transform. The creatures followed Isaiah through the broken halls, their footsteps echoing like thunder rolling across a graveyard. The walls whispered their own stories, the desperate prayers of mothers, the cold laughter of men who played God, the blood spilled in shadows no one dared to chase. Isaiah paused before a door sealed tight with rusted iron, a door Miriam had warned was never to be opened. He traced the cold metal, feeling the history locked inside. This was the chamber where the Holts had conducted their most forbidden experiments, the place where humanity had been twisted and shattered. Miriam's voice broke the silence. "If you open that door, there's no turning back. Not for you, not for any of us." Isaiah smiled, a dark, knowing smile. "I'm not here to turn back. I'm here to finish what they started, to become what they feared." The creatures circled the door, bodies tense and alive with unnatural energy. Isaiah reached for the latch and pulled. The door groaned open, revealing a room bathed in cold, pale light. Instruments hung on the walls, tools of cruelty disguised as science. Jars filled with strange, preserved things sat on dusty shelves. A long table stood in the center, stained with memories. Isaiah stepped inside, eyes blazing. This is where the circle begins and ends, where the broken become whole, where the past is consumed. Miriam followed, her breath shallow. "And what happens to the rest of us?" Isaiah turned slowly. "The rest of you will watch, because this story is bigger than any of us. It's about power, about control, about the price of survival." He looked back at the creatures, his fractured family. "And now we take what's ours." The room seemed to pulse with energy, the air thick with the promise of transformation and terror. Outside, the plantation stood silent, waiting for the reckoning to come. The room smelled of rust and forgotten nightmares. Every corner whispered stories of pain and ambition twisted into something monstrous. Isaiah stood at the center, the ledger clutched tightly in his hands, the weight of generations pressing down on him. The creatures gathered close, their eyes reflecting the pale light like shards of broken glass. They were no longer just broken children of cruelty. They were becoming something new, something that carried the echoes of every soul that had ever suffered under the Holt name. Isaiah's voice was low but unyielding. "This ledger is more than a record. It's a map, a guide, a testament to what was lost and what can be reclaimed. Miriam's eyes burned with desperation. You're chasing ghosts, Isaiah. Ghosts that will destroy you. He shook his head slowly. No, I am chasing truth. The truth the Holts tried to bury beneath bodies and silence. The creatures around him shifted, some reaching toward the ledger as if drawn by its power. Isaiah opened it again, tracing the names with reverence and rage. Each entry was a story of pain, endurance, betrayal. They thought pain would make us weaker, Isaiah said. They were wrong. Pain made us stronger, smarter, harder to kill. Miriam's voice cracked. But at what cost? What will you become if you embrace that strength? Isaiah met her gaze, unflinching. What I must, because the world doesn't care about broken things. It only respects power. The ledger seemed to pulse in his hands, a heartbeat syncing with his own. The creatures around him hummed in response, a chorus of agony and hope entwined. Miriam stepped back, fear etched in every line of her face. I don't know if you can come back from this. Isaiah's smile was a blade of ice. Maybe I don't want to come back. The creatures around him shifted, some reaching toward the ledger as if drawn by its power. Isaiah opened it again, tracing the names with reverence and rage. Each entry was a story of pain, endurance, betrayal. They thought pain would make us weaker, Isaiah said. They were wrong. Pain made us stronger, smarter, harder to kill. Miriam's voice cracked. But at what cost? What will you become if you embrace that strength? Isaiah met her gaze, unflinching. What I must, because the world doesn't care about broken things. It only respects power. The ledger seemed to pulse in his hands, a heartbeat syncing with his own. The creatures around him hummed in response, a chorus of agony and hope entwined. Miriam stepped back, fear etched in every line of her face. I don't know if you can come back from this. Isaiah's smile was a blade of ice. Maybe I don't want to come back. He looked to the door, to the waiting darkness beyond. The darkness where the Holt's final secrets waited. And he knew this was only the beginning. The deeper Isaiah and the creatures moved into the bowels of the plantation, the heavier the air grew. Walls stained with forgotten sins seemed to close in, the silence broken only by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, his and theirs, entwined like threads in a tapestry of darkness. Miriam followed, every step a battle between hope and dread. She could feel the pull of the legacy dragging Isaiah further down a path she couldn't follow, a path carved in blood and sealed with secrets. Isaiah paused before a heavy oak door, the one that hid the heart of the Holt's twisted work. His hand trembled just slightly as he reached out and touched the cold wood, feeling the echoes of pain and power trapped behind it. "This is where everything begins," he said, voice a whisper yet heavy with command. Miriam looked at him, eyes wide. "And where it ends?" Isaiah smiled, a cold, hard smile. "Maybe, or maybe it's where the real story starts." With a slow breath, he pushed the door open. Inside was a room frozen in time, tables scarred by steel. Jars of unknown substances glint in the dim light. Instruments designed to wound and remake. The air was thick with the ghosts of those who had suffered here. Isaiah stepped inside, creatures gathering behind him, their twisted forms melding with the shadows. He opened the ledger once more, flipping to a page marked by a single symbol, a circle broken in two. "Here is where the line was shattered," Isaiah said, voice low. "Well, the Holts tried to play God and failed. But failure isn't the end. Miriam's voice cracked with desperation. This legacy is a curse. Isaiah turned, eyes blazing. It's power. Power they feared. Power they couldn't control. And power I will command. The creatures hummed in response, a rising tide of ancient energy. Miriam swallowed hard, knowing the fight was over before it even began. Isaiah whispered, "The circle will be complete, one way or another." The room seemed to pulse with life, the shadows dancing to a dark rhythm. And outside, the plantation waiting for the reckoning. Isaiah stood in the cold light of the hidden chamber. The ledger's pages spread before him like a prophecy carved in ink and blood. The weight of history pressed down on his shoulders, but with it came a strange clarity, like the fractured pieces of his existence were finally aligning. Behind him, the creatures stirred, their broken bodies now moving with a purpose beyond mere survival. They were no longer victims, no longer experiments left to rot. They were the living embodiment of a forgotten promise, a power born of pain and resilience. Miriam's voice broke the silence, trembling but fierce. "You think this power will save you, but it will consume you. The Holt's legacy is a poison, and you're drinking it like water." Isaiah's eyes narrowed, cold and unwavering. "It's not poison. It's the truth. The truth of who I am and who we all are." He traced a finger over a faded symbol in the ledger, the broken circle. "They try to tear us apart, to bury us in darkness. But I'm here to bring us back, to make us whole." Miriam stepped closer, her voice urgent. "At what cost? How many more will suffer so you can claim this power?" Isaiah's smile was a razor's edge. Power always demands sacrifice. The question is, who will pay the price? The creatures around him hummed, their collective heartbeat syncing with his own. The room seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, one that thrummed through the walls and seeped into the very soil beneath them. Miriam's eyes searched Isaiah's, pleading for a spark of the child she once knew. But what she saw was something else entirely. A man forged in shadow and fire. A force no longer bound by fear or guilt. Isaiah whispered, voice low and commanding, "The circle will close. The past will be claimed, and the future will bow." The ledger snapped shut, the sound echoing like a death knell. Outside, the plantation held its breath, and the reckoning loomed. The weight of what Isaiah carried pressed down like the cold iron chains that once bound his ancestors. But this was no mere burden. It was a weapon, a legacy forged in cruelty, twisted into power, sharpened by betrayal. And now, it pulsed through his veins like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Miriam's voice trembled as she watched him step deeper into the darkness. "This isn't you. You're still a boy who deserves a life beyond the horrors they created." Isaiah's eyes flashed with something ancient and merciless. "There is no boy left, only the echo of what they made me to be and what I choose to become." The creatures around him shifted, their forms solidifying into something more human, more terrifying. They were the broken pieces of a family shattered by greed and ambition. Now, united under Isaiah's will, they were whole. He turned to Miriam, voice low and commanding. "You think you can stop this? You think anyone can?" Her breath caught in her throat. Isaiah smiled, a cold, cruel curve. "The Holt legacy isn't just a curse. It's an evolution, and I am its herald." The air thickened, heavy with the scent of decay and power. Miriam took a step back, her hand shaking. What will you become, Isaiah? He looked to the shadows, to the creatures who followed him, and then back to her. I will become the reckoning, the end of their lives, the beginning of a new order. The plantation seemed to pulse with life, the darkness alive with anticipation. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the bloodlines stirred, ready to rise. Isaiah's footsteps echoed through the hollow halls, each step a drumbeat heralding a coming storm. The plantation, once a silent witness to cruelty, now throbbed with a sinister life, alive with secrets that no light had ever touched. The creatures trailing behind him were no longer just twisted echoes of the past. They were an army reborn from suffering, bound by blood and purpose. Miriam's eyes burned with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. This path leads only to destruction. Power built on broken bodies is a foundation destined to crumble. Isaiah's gaze pierced through the darkness, unyielding. Power built on truth is eternal. The Holt try to fracture us, but we are unbreakable. He stopped before a grand staircase leading to the upper floors, the heart of the house, where the darkest secrets awaited. His voice dropped to a whisper, cold and precise. They thought they could play God, but gods don't ask permission. The creatures behind him stirred, a low hum rising from their unified breath. The house itself seemed to respond, walls creaking as if awakening from a long sleep. Miriam stepped forward, voice trembling but fierce. You're not a god, Isaiah. You're a child carrying a legacy you don't understand. Isaiah smiled, but it wasn't warmth she saw. It was the chill of inevitability. I understand more than you think. This legacy isn't a curse, it's a crown. The first step onto the staircase was a declaration. The creatures followed, their shadows merging with his, forming a dark tide rising to reclaim what was stolen. Miriam's voice broke the silence. If you continue, there's no turning back. Isaiah glanced over his shoulder, eyes blazing. I stopped turning back the moment I was born. The house groaned, the floorboards beneath them trembling, and above, the sky darkened. The reckoning was near. The grand staircase groaned beneath their weight, each creak a reminder of the burdens this house had borne. Isaiah ascended slowly, his footsteps deliberate, echoing in the cavernous silence. Behind him, the creatures moved like shadows given flesh, their twisted forms blending with the darkness, growing stronger with each step. Miriam's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm of desperation and dread. Isaiah, she pleaded, this path leads only to ruin. The legacy you embrace will consume you. Isaiah's gaze didn't waver. It burned with cold certainty, as if the fire within him had been fanned by centuries of pain and sacrifice. I am no longer a child. I am the consequence of their sins and the bearer of their power. The hallway stretched before them, lined with faded portraits, faces frozen in time, eyes staring silently from the past. Each was a chapter in a story written in blood, in whispered horrors kept behind locked doors. At the end stood a door, heavy and imposing, adorned with symbols worn by time. Isaiah reached out, fingers trembling, not from fear, but anticipation. This is where it ends, he whispered. Miriam stepped beside him, voice breaking. Or where it begins. Isaiah turned, eyes glowing faintly. For me, it's both. With a slow breath, he pushed open the door. Inside was a room unlike any other, a sanctum of dark purpose. Ancient tomes lay scattered, Vials filled with strange liquids glowed faintly, and at the center, a chair bound with iron and leather, an altar to the Holt's obsession. The creatures gathered around, silent and reverent. Isaiah approached the chair, his voice steady and cold. "This is where we reclaim what was stolen." Miriam's hands trembled as she whispered, "And what becomes of the world when you do?" Isaiah's smile was a blade in the night. "It changes forever." The room pulsed with energy, shadows twisting into shapes that whispered promises of power and destruction. Outside, the plantation waited for the reckoning to come. Isaiah's fingers brushed over the cold iron restraints of the chair, feeling the centuries of pain embedded in the metal. This was more than an instrument of torture. It was a symbol of control, domination, and twisted ambition. The Holts had poured their darkest desires into this room, crafting a crucible where innocence was shattered and power was forged in blood. Behind him, the creatures gathered, their forms shifting subtly, limbs straightening, eyes sharpening, as if the very presence of the chamber rekindled lost strength. They were no longer broken fragments. They were a force, bound by blood and purpose, ready to rise. Miriam's voice trembled with a mix of fear and sorrow. "Isaiah, this place is a tomb. It holds the echoes of suffering no child should bear." Isaiah turned slowly, eyes gleaming with cold fire. "It is also a forge, where the broken are remade, where the past becomes future." He opened the ledger again, running his fingers over the faded ink. Each name was a story of endurance, a testament to survival against impossible odds. The Holts believed pain was a weapon. Isaiah knew it was the key. Miriam stepped forward, desperation breaking through. "You don't have to become what they made you. You can choose differently." Isaiah's smile was thin, almost cruel. "Choice is an illusion in the legacy we inherit. But I choose to wield it, not be crushed by it." The creatures hummed softly, a rising tide of ancient energy synchronizing with his heartbeat. The room seemed alive, shadows shifting and swirling, waiting for the final act. Miriam swallowed hard, knowing this moment was a turning point, where past and future collided, and a line between salvation and damnation blurred. Isaiah's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried like thunder. "The circle will close tonight. The legacy will rise." The plantation held its breath, and the reckoning came. The chamber pulsed with a life of its own, a heartbeat forged from centuries of silence and suffering. Isaiah stood at its center, the ledger closed but never forgotten, a symbol of a legacy both cursed and powerful. The creatures around him no longer shuffled but stood tall, shadows cast long and unyielding. Miriam's voice trembled as she stepped forward. "This isn't just history, Isaiah. It's a warning, a chain, a trap." Isaiah's eyes, cold and sharp, met hers without hesitation. "Or a key." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn pendant, the last remnant of his mother's touch. It shimmered faintly under the dim light. "This," he said, "is the mark of the circle's true heir, not by blood alone, but by will." Miriam's breath caught. "And what will you do with that will?" Isaiah's smile was a razor's edge. "I will break the chains that bind us, not to free the past, but to rewrite the future." Behind him, the creatures murmured their assent, a chorus of voices rising from darkness. Miriam's eyes filled with tears. "And what are the cost? How many more lives will be lost?" Isaiah stepped closer, voice low and absolute. The cost has already been paid, in silence, in blood, in shadows. Now it's time to claim what is owed. The air thickened, heavy with ancient power and the promise of upheaval. The plantation itself seemed to lean in, waiting, as if the earth held its breath. Miriam took a final, shaky breath. Remember who you are, Isaiah. Don't lose yourself in the darkness. He nodded once, a gesture both solemn and resolute. I'm no longer the boy they buried. I am a man who will rise. And with that, the circle closed. The final hour approached like a storm on the horizon, inevitable, fierce, and unforgiving. Isaiah stood before the ancient hearth, the flames flickering as if sensing the weight of what was to come. The creatures gathered close, no longer the broken fragments of tortured souls, but a force united in purpose and power. Miriam's voice, fragile yet fierce, broke the heavy silence. This moment will define you. Will you be the master of a legacy or its victim? Isaiah's gaze burned with a cold fire. I will be the master, the architect of a new order born from the ashes of their cruelty. The ledger lay open on the table, its pages worn but alive with the Bloodlines' history. Every name is a thread woven into the fabric of pain and power. Every story is a step toward this reckoning. Tonight, Isaiah whispered, the circle will complete itself. The broken will be whole. The silenced will roar. Miriam's eyes filled with tears. And the world, Isaiah's smile was merciless. The world will learn to fear what it ignored for too long. The creatures shifted, their forms pulsing with a dark energy that filled the room, thickening the air and tightening the silence. Miriam stepped closer, reaching out but pulling back, knowing this was a crossing point. Remember yourself. Remember the light that still flickers inside. Isaiah's voice dropped to a whisper, but it echoed like a command. The light is necessary, only to see the darkness clearly, to wield it without faltering. The room seemed to close in, the walls humming with power and promise. Outside, the plantation held its breath. A sleeping giant awakened at last. Isaiah raised his hand, the creatures responding as one. The circle was complete, and the reckoning had begun. The dawn did not break gently over the Tennessee hills. It came like a judgment, harsh, unrelenting, unstoppable. Isaiah stood atop the steps of the old plantation house, the weight of his legacy now a living force behind him. The creatures, once shadows of suffering, now towers of power, bowed in silent allegiance. Miriam watched, heart heavy with sorrow and something like hope, a hope that even now, in the darkest hour, the boy she once knew could still be reached. But Isaiah was no longer that boy. He was the embodiment of a bloodline forged in pain, sharpened by cruelty and tempered by an iron will. He spoke, voice low and commanding, carrying the power of generations. This legacy was never meant to be hidden. It was forged in darkness to bring light, a light born not of innocence, but of endurance and strength. Behind him, the creatures rose, a tide of raw, untamed power ready to reshape the world. Miriam stepped forward one last time, voice trembling yet resolute. Isaiah, this path will change everything. Are you ready to bear the cost? He met her gaze without hesitation. I was born to bear it, to carry this burden and wield this power, to be more than a victim, to be a force no one can ignore. The plantation trembled beneath their feet, the earth itself awakening to the reckoning unleashed. Isaiah raised his hand, and with it, the promise of a new era, one written in blood, shadow, and unbreakable will. The circle is closed. The past is claimed. The future begins now. The world shuddered, and nothing would ever be the same again.